Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sire, here today to discuss with you the origins of the First World War. In particular, this will be an introduction into the immediate cause of the outbreak in 1914. As always, it is important to stress that this is going to be a lesson catered more towards the student level, particularly the A-level standard in Great Britain. So because of that, the content I'll provide to you today will have key knowledge, and the video will indeed be dedicated more towards understanding and practicing our historical skills. That's what this three-part series will cover. We are historians after all, and that is our goal. It's all going to learn this knowledge, this information about the past I'm going to tell you about in my following few videos. However, if we don't use this knowledge properly, what would really be the point? So notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. As I said, this is of course covering the immediate causes of the conflict, and in this video we're going to go over the key players and key nations that were involved. The next video will be the one that will cover the actual deeper context in detail. So it's important to understand that the world was different over 100 years ago now in 1914. And exactly what exactly does that mean? Well, let us find out together. So the first thing I want us to really consider is let's actually look at the details from the past itself, a primary source, if you will. And that's exactly what we have on the screen for us here. First thing we should always look at with any source is I always say what you see. In the inquiry at hand, what is this actually going to tell us about how World War One started? And a good way to think is just first off, what nations are involved? You should hope to be able to see that each of them, each of the images has an individual here, seem generally male in appearance, and they all have somewhat military garments on, whether it's a piked helmet, as we can see here, or indeed boots they're wearing, or even just the general stance, of course, quite forceful, quite aggressive, or even in the case of this first one here, while quite small, labeled Serbia, quite defiant in their posture. And there's a bit of a repetitive pattern here. If we read the image left to right, the first part, if you touch me, I'll, is then suddenly grabbed by Austria. If you make a move, I'll, and then Russia's grabbing, Germany's grabbing, and then France. And this one here at the back is England. They're rushing in with the same idea. Someone's being attacked, and they're coming to the other's defense. Now, we don't need to necessarily know what these nations represent at first, but we can certainly gather that there seems to be a bit of a team split in how they are organized. So, of course, the one on the left here, Serbia, is being attacked by Austria, and then Russia is the one coming to the defense, the evident grab of the shoulder, the raised fist in defiance, but also worth noting, very similar in gesture and appearance to how Austria is doing theirs. Then Germany is getting involved; they appear to be allied with Austria, and then France and England are coming rushing in, likely to come into Russia's aid. And as the key question says, what can we infer from this? How can we understand that everyone is indeed on a different side? Well, this is why it leads us to what's called the provenance of the source. This bit of text at the bottom, feel free to, of course, pause it and read it in your own time. However, the title is very important. It's a cartoon and it's a chain of friendship, and this chain, much like a domino effect, has effectively unraveled and has resulted in each nation siding with a different one. And we can group them probably succinctly: Serbia and Russia on a team with France and England, and then Austria and Germany on a team as well going against it. And a way I like to remember this is to think of a classic schoolyard brawl. You have two groups of friends, and of course, one group of friends is kind of falling out with another one, and it's escalated as friends would rightfully do. They come to their own friend's aid, and they don't want to see him in harm's way. And so, of course, they've come out and they've aggressively grabbed the other, and of course, resulting in this, where suddenly we've spiraled out, and a whole world war indeed has happened, as the caption reads: if one attacks the other, suddenly each nation is falling upon each nation, and we have a key conflict. Now, why use a primary source? Well, we use a primary source to go back to the provenance, our little bit of our caption snippet at the bottom. It's important to know the date. This came out in July 1914, and so very late in the month when all these events were spiraling out of control and into a conflict. That's important to bear in mind as we go forward and learn some of the deeper context. And of course, important to note as well is where this source has come from. It's come from an American newspaper, the Brooklyn Eagle, and it's important to say that an American newspaper. If we look at the source again, Is America in the source? Well, no. So that's quite interesting to note straight out of the gate, really, is that America is not in this image. They're the ones in the neutral stance, far away, across the water, and of course the ones looking in. And so eagle-eyed viewers will probably be able to gather this appears not necessarily a world war at this stage, but European in nature. So we'll bear that in mind, bear this source in mind, and we'll go forward now and learn a little bit more of the context at play. So the first off, as I say, just to make sure you've got those key players nice and lined out, if you're taking notes or of course following along, we have on one side, because of course each group's going to have a name. We have on the left-hand side here the Entente Powers, or the Entente Cordiale, as it was of course named when Britain and France first formed their coalition earlier in, of course, the century. And so there are key three players at this point: Great Britain, France, and Russia. And then the other side is the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. You'll see, of course, some shall we say, sources and citations will list as a triple alliance, and then include Italy as well. We're not going to include Italy because essentially Italy is a more minor power in play at this, and relatively quick into the war, they of course switch sides and join the Entente powers. As the series goes on, we get into deeper battles in another nation, the Ottoman Empire, or something similar to modern day Turkey. It's going to be the ones that we'd follow in that regard. So there are two teams and two key players that we should, of course, be aware of. It's important to note, effectively, the de facto leaders are Great Britain and Germany. They're the ones who are the two most preeminent powers at this time in Europe, and the ones who are going to have the big rivalry with one another. Of course, it's important to know as well our general geography, a bit of a information, of course, of where each nation is. Because again, it's slightly different to how we have in the modern world. You saw on the previous page there, it said Austria-Hungary. So I want to point out to this red nation in the middle here, this indeed is Austria-Hungary. And no, indeed, it is not effectively saying that, of course, Austria and Hungary are separate. They're actually united. They're in a dual monarchy at this time. So in our modern world, there are separate nations. They're autonomous from one another. Whereas here they are as one. They're under the same leader at this time, Franz Josef. And so it's important to remember that as we go forward. Same for Germany. That, of course, was initially Prussia, but expanding, became a much bigger nation in Central Europe than we have in the modern world. Whereas we see with France on the left in blue and Great Britain, of course, here of the English Channel, is effectively still generally in shape what they were in our time today. I want to note as well with Britain that when we say Great Britain, we actually include all of Ireland at this time. It's not Northern Ireland as it currently is in our timeline. And back then, all of Ireland was under the jurisdiction of Great Britain. But of course, there was a lot of friction within Ireland. Many, of course, were separatists and wanted to break away, and we had the Unionist factions. But of course, for the sake of this video, we're not going to get into too much detail about that. But it's important to remember when we say Great Britain that all of Ireland is counted towards it. And then Russia is this large swath of yellow over here on our eastern front, our right hand side. And of course, they're the ones who are surrounding our central powers. And this is why they are called the Central Powers. We have Russia on the right, with France and Britain on the left, and then Austria-Hungary, and Germany watched in the middle. And this is a key problem for the Central Powers, and it's why they, of course, it's a big reason. The geography is why the alliances are the way they are. Germany and Austria-Hungary feel surrounded by the Entente powers, and of course, aren't too pleased with that. They, of course, want to have some security, and so unite together because they fear something called a two-front war, where they have to have a facing Russia on the right, and of course, Britain and France on the left. They don't really want to go through that, certainly not alone. So this alliance system is very important as we go forward, how the geography has defined it. One more side note I do want to say about Great Britain. As I said, I've already mentioned that, of course, it's not just Northern Ireland, it's all of Ireland. Britain is also a wider empire as well. We have vast amount of nations that are, of course, considered here. Again, although it's currently European in nature, this is a key reason why it's going to become a world war. Because Britain has an empire all around. Again, feel free to pause the video if you wish. But the main faction are, of course, the Anzac troops from Australia and New Zealand. We have Newfoundland soldiers from, of course, modern day Canada. Indian troops from the British Raj, and even South Africa as well, and several other nations we could get into as well. And so it's important to remember that as we go forward. This is a world war we're going to see, and with Britain as a key player, its empire, as the series goes on, as you will see, will come into play quite heavily. So indeed, that's the general background information there for the origins of the First World War. As I say in my following part, we'll go into the actual deeper situation of how this fully triggered. What was the trigger for war indeed occurring? If you haven't, of course, checked it out already, do of course come back for my next video and of course learn more about this history. Thank you for watching this one. I hope you have found it quite insightful. Do check out the next part of the series if you want to learn some more history with Sire and of course the immediate causes of the outbreak. Thank you for listening.